Hello everyone, we are back. Let's just dive right in, okay? So, we were talking about how the self is made up of three ingredients: self-awareness, the self-concept, and self-esteem. So, let's take a look at intrapersonal communication in here, okay? Self-awareness does not require intrapersonal communication, okay? But intrapersonal communication is going to result from self-awareness. You being self-aware that I can reflect on my thoughts. I can go, my gosh, I've been negative today. Oh my gosh, I have been so on it today, or whatever, whatever I do. The fact that I have intrapersonal communication requires that I am a self-aware person. Does that make sense? I just asked an empty room, really, if that makes sense. So I hope that makes sense. I'll rephrase that, okay? So self-awareness allows and sort of makes way for intrapersonal communication. My self-concept is my overall perception of who I am. So self-concept, to say it another way, is the meanings that I've made about myself. The self-concept is not formed completely inwardly, though, okay? So I want to make sure I'm clear when I say this. The self-concept is not solely the product of intrapersonal communication. Your self-concept has a lot to do with how other people treat you, but it also has to do with the meanings you make and the things you tell yourself about how other people treat you and about how you treat yourself. Okay, so your self-concept is both. And then self-esteem, the overall value, positive or negative, that we assign to ourselves. You are making meaning when it comes to the things about you that feed or hurt your self-esteem. And so intrapersonal communication is there with our self-concept and our self-esteem. And so I wanted to make sure that was clear. So now let's get this. Now here's one of the reasons why this is so important for us to talk about. Okay, high or low self-esteem has a powerful effect on communicative behavior, and it has that powerful effect on communicative behavior inwardly, intrapersonally, right? And outwardly, interpersonally. And so the ways that we understand ourselves and the meanings that we make and the value that we assign really impacts the ways we behave communicatively with ourselves and with others. So to sort of wrap us up here, self-awareness prompts us to ask ourselves, who am I? And self-concept is the answer to that question. See, so self-awareness leads us into the ability to communicate intrapersonally. Self-concept is sort of the product of our intrapersonal communication and our interpersonal interactions with other people, okay? Self-esteem is the answer to the follow-up question, given who I am, what's my evaluation of myself? And so I hope that you can see in the way that all of this is worded that intrapersonal communication is throughout the creation, the navigation, the formation, whatever words you want to use there, of our self-concept, our self-esteem, okay? And so if you'll remember, personality was the nature side of us. The self is the nurture. The self is the thing this is the social part of us. This is the part of us that is socialized. And so, if I ask a question sometimes in class and someone goes, we were socialized that way, what you're saying is that is the nurture part of us, okay? So personality is more on the nature side. Self is more on the nurture side. So to be a little more specific when it comes to actually defining the self, okay, because that's what we're doing this week. The self is sort of the point, right? So here's another way of looking at it. We said on the prior slide that it was a multidimensional process, forming from social interaction and evolving in communication with ourselves and others. So then here's another way: an evolving composite of one's self-esteem, self-concept, and self-awareness. So we took the three ingredients, we broke them down, and now we take them back, we put them all together. This is a really good way of looking at what the self is, okay? And then I decided to go to dictionary.com and just sort of see what the internet had to say. I was inspired by the definitions of communication that you all found in week 1 and posted to the discussion board. So I decided to go check this out myself, and this is pretty good stuff. An individual's consciousness of their own identity or being. And so the cool thing about this one is it's about your awareness, that's consciousness, right? Your awareness, your consciousness of your identity, your consciousness of your being. And so what that means is Identity is not self, but you can be aware of who you are. Okay? Another one, who I am. We asked that question on the prior slide. The distinct individuality of a person or thing. So your individual personhood and who you are. A person's typical body makeup and personal characteristics. And so these are the things that are going to feed into your self-concept usually, right? So what's your bodily makeup and what are your personal characteristics, okay? So then, so that's a really good way of sort of just defining the self. And another way to talk about this is to look at it in these two other ways I'm about to show you. These two other things I use in my interpersonal class to sort of highlight how we understand ourselves. I'm going to pull in intrapersonal communication though when I pull these up. So another way of looking at ourselves, and this goes back to the point I made in the last screencast about how even if we say that the self is always evolving, even if we say that the self is a process, even if we say that the self is fluid, there's still something inside of me that says there's something that's really me and there are some things that are not really me. There are times when I act and I go, yeah, I was myself. And then there are times where I walk away from an interaction and I go, I was not being myself at all. And I did something that was not true to myself. I also mentioned in the last screencast that some of the larger faith traditions in the world have this idea of a true self or a real self or really who you are inside. And ultimately, I think this speaks to that, okay? The perceived self. The person you believe yourself to be in moments of honest self-examination. I think that this is one of those things where we do not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and saying, everything's fluid. Well, yeah, the self is fluid. It's always changing, but there is personality, okay? There is something that's really sort of you there. And what the perceived self does is it takes the self, it takes the personality, and then it's the person you believe yourself to really be in moments of honest self-examination. So this can be wrong. There are some people who have inaccurate perceived selves, but right or wrong is not really the point here. The point here is that we have this idea of who we are, and it's actually intrapersonal communication that we use to reflect on and understand our own perceived self. I hope that makes sense. In moments of honest self-examination, honest self-examination requires good intrapersonal communication. And so that's really where that is. And then to kind of contrast this is the presenting self. The presenting self is the public image, the representative that we allow everyone to interact with on a daily basis. Now, you have a perceived self, you have a presenting self. The fact that you have a presenting self does not mean you are fake. It doesn't mean you're a phony. It doesn't mean that there is anything wrong with you. It means that we are not going to bear who we really think we are all the time. We only, well, okay, no, I shouldn't say only, because some people do it more than others, but for the most part, we will not bear our perceived self for just anybody. That requires emotional and relational intimacy for us to really bear our perceived self to other people. And so you have a perceived self, you have a presenting self, and this is a really good way of highlighting the role intrapersonal communication plays in the way that we understand and interact with ourselves and with others. So that's the self. Now, to sort of bring it all together, I want to hit identity. Okay, so here we go. Identity is the sum of the parts. Now, I know we said, wait a minute, the self is the sum of the parts of the self-awareness, self-concept, and self-esteem. Yes, but identity is the sum of all the parts, okay? You take your personality, you take yourself, your sense of self, that is your identity, okay? So, identities, here's a way of sort of defining it, okay? The traits and characteristics, social relations, roles, and social group memberships that define who one is. So notice how personality, self, and identity all define who we are. We use these different concepts to make sense of who we are, and it's because, you know, there's a lot to us. I don't know, some people say we're not complicated. I think we're pretty complicated, and I think that you can see that here. So your identity is you take yourself, you take your personality, you look outside yourself, you look inside yourself, and that's how you form your identity. So you have multiple identities. That's how we work, right? You probably don't have multiple personalities. That's a different thing. Okay? So here we go more on identity. It can be focused on the past. Now this is interesting. The ways that you understand who you are can be focused on the past, things of what used to be true, the present, what's true right now, or the future. The person you expect or wish to become, or the person you feel obligated to become, or the person you fear you will become. Let that sink in. So much of how we understand ourselves in the present moment can have, it's possible that your identity is actually rooted in the past of who you used to be. It's possible your identity is rooted in the future of maybe someone you hope you become, or maybe you feel obligated, or someone you fear, or the present even, what's true now. And so I think that's really interesting to understand, that the ways that we understand ourselves can be rooted in the past, present, and future. And sometimes it's all of them, sometimes it's one of them. And so one of the things that I almost did for a journal entry this week, but I decided not to, and I do this in the future, is to have you reflect on that. You know, where is your identity focused on, right? Some of you are like, present, I'm a student, move on to the next thing, right? Others of you are like, well, I plan to have a family, or some of you are like, my kids are going to move out someday, or some of you some of you are still thinking about something that used to be true, you know. I have students all the time who are not good students in high school, and then they come into my classroom, and their identity as a student is focused on something in the past, and they're trying to overcome that. And so I just think this is really powerful for us to talk about. So identities are orienting. They provide a meaning-making lens and focus our attention on some, but not other features of the immediate context. And so our understanding of who we are, what our social relations, roles, social group membership, stuff like that, when you take the self, you take the personality, you put it together, it orients us in the present moment to focus on certain things, to go a certain direction, okay? And so that's really important, okay? Identities provide a meaning-making anchor. They become the way we interact with the world. They become sort of the filter that everything goes through, okay? Choices large and small can feel identity-based and identity congruent. I mean, we live in Colorado where everything is identity-based. The food choices you make, the alcohol choices people make. I know people who will only drink certain types of, in fact, they'll only drink craft beer because, you know, they have issues with the giant beer corporations that I will not name. But so choices large and small can feel identity-based. The music we choose to listen to, the type of food, right? Are you someone who is comfortable being a carnivore? Are you an omnivore? Are you someone who is a vegan or a vegetarian? Are you someone who only eats fruit and nuts? I mean, what is that? The choice of food has to do with identity. Do you see how even the things of survival can become a part of our identity? The types of vehicles, the size and look and location of home, the type of, I mean, we as human beings, all sorts of choices begin to feel and become pieces of our identity. So the feeling of knowing oneself is important. I'm going to hide this so you can see this. The feeling of knowing oneself is important, even though the assumption on which it is based can and often is faulty. So part of what we're doing in this course is really trying to know ourselves better. What we're trying to do in this course is learn to communicate with ourselves more clearly, more positively, so that we can do the things we want to do and not have our intrapersonal communication hinder what it is that we're doing. So I am at 14 minutes and 30 seconds. We're cooking along here. I will see you in the next screencast.